Hello, everybody. Welcome. Come get settled, grab a snack, and enjoy what promises to be a lovely hour together. Really glad that you could all make it today to hear a little bit more about a project we've been working on so long and has been such a passion project for everyone involved, the Clinical Research Glossary. And we have new words to talk about and new opportunities for using it. We're celebrating today, and we'll be celebrating with our speakers, Deb Collier, Chris Decker, Aaron Milbrod. I'm Sylvia Baydorf-Cassis. I'm a program director here at the MRCT Center. Been here for about 6 years and am really looking forward to sharing this resource with you. I'm also joined by Kaylee Toe, a project manager that I have the pleasure of working with. Next slide. As you're getting settled, some reminders for today's session, just to make sure that you have a pleasant experience this lunch or breakfast or afternoon libation, is to please use the Q&A function to ask any questions. We will do our best to answer live, but the Q&A function allows us to be able to curate those questions well. You'll see closed captioning is enabled, so please feel free to use that if you need it. We'll be dropping relevant links into the chat, so stay tuned for that. When we're talking about a few things, you'll see some links going through. And all the slides, recording, any materials from today's session will be available on our website in a few days to a week or so. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're joined by these lovely panelists who will be doing a little bit of an intro of themselves when their time to speak comes up, but I wanted to just give them that warm welcome and know that you'll all be enjoying some remarks that they've prepared in celebration of this glossary as well, and looking ahead to how we can use it. Next slide, please. And this disclaimer just indicates that none of us here have a conflict of interest related to anything that's being presented today. Next slide, please. So in terms of the overview, I'll give a little introduction. It'll be quick. And then we're going to move into some glossary highlights, just showing you this brand new, updated, re-released clinical research glossary for you to enjoy. We'll have some prepared remarks and then some discussion. A quick look at some next steps, where we're going from here, and then opening it up to audience Q&A as we are able. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to understand the need for a glossary like this from the patient and the industry perspectives. Explain how this glossary has been improved since its original iteration from a pilot a few years ago, and then start identifying opportunities to integrate this glossary into your own work. Next slide, please. So before we get into the meat of the glossary, I would just like to highlight a little bit about the MRCT Center in case you're not familiar with our organization. The MRCT Center is a research and policy center. We're based out of Boston, Massachusetts, and we work on this environment of clinical trials, focusing on conduct, oversight, ethics, and regulations. Our vision is to improve the integrity, safety, and rigor of global clinical trials, and we do that by engaging with diverse stakeholders across the research ecosystem to really define what are the emerging issues in the clinical trial space, and then to create and implement ethical, actionable, and most importantly, practical solutions. We really believe on being able to put things into action into your everyday role and responsibility. And you can learn more about us at mrctcenter.org. Next slide, please. So I would just be remiss to not mention that the MRCT's history of work in health literacy and also in patient centricity, which is a buzzword now, and maybe we didn't call it that in 2013 when we started work on return of results, looking at plain language summaries and what it is that participants need or expect to be able to understand research results at the end of the study. but we've been working in this space for over 10 years now. In 2017, we released a kit on returning aggregate results that had a really large component focused on health literacy and clear communication. And as a result, when I came on board in 2018, I was able to take on this lovely role of running a health literacy program and thinking about health literacy throughout the clinical research life cycle, not just at the end of the study, but all the way throughout. We released a resource in 2019 focused all on health literacy and clinical research, and also initiated a series of different types of trainings, both on site or virtual for folks at different institutions. And also we have an online IRB training focused on health literacy. When the pandemic started in 2020, we sprung into action and developed some COVID-19 related research flyers to sort of serve as an intro to research. And at that time as well, after we'd been having this health literacy and clinical research website out for a year or so, it became clear that people wanted a glossary. Yes, there are glossaries out there, medical glossaries, different kinds of dictionaries, but nothing that was focused exclusively on clinical research and in such a way that it is plain language and easy to understand for patients, participants, caregivers, and others in the public. Next slide, please. So we launched that pilot, and in 2021, we're able to release the results of that with a webinar where we shared our experience of creating a 53-word glossary and what it was like to actually put that into the world and what the best practices we were starting to evolve and develop were. That was met with a ton of enthusiasm as well. And so in 2022, we continued to grow it. We started our expansion efforts. We've brought new folks on board. We have an expert advisory committee. We have a new partnership and collaboration with CDISC that was established in 2023. And you'll hear a bit more about CDISC shortly, but really being able to bring this plain language glossary out to the world as a global standard for plain language communication. And here we are here in 2024, launching this glossary with this webinar today. You'll see there's some links to a few background pieces of literature as well. If you're interested in those, will be in the chat as well. Next slide, please. So all I want to mention when it comes to this process that we follow is that we have an iterative approach to developing our definitions and the content. We think about selecting the terms based on what patients want to know. Where are they seeing difficult words, and where are the pain points in terms of understanding and communication for folks in the research sort of communicator side? Where do we need to focus on for words? We define words in plain language, simple, and we bring many perspectives to the table. Our current work group has approximately 27 folks on that group. And when we refine, we really focus on consensus. We have a all hands on deck approach, and we really focus on non-perfection. We refine by thinking about, how can I accept this definition based on all the stakeholders that are at this table and discussing their perspectives? Can we accept this definition? We then move to a public review process, which has been one of the hallmarks of our partnership with CDISC, to be able to bring these definitions out into the world and let others be able to comment on them as well. And then we move it into finalization. We iterate based on the comments received. We have more work group reviews, and then release. We release them out. So this is our massive release today of not only the 53 that had been done before, but an additional 113, 117 actually, so that we're at our number for today. And so we also have an entire section of supportive information and images that are developed along this pipeline as well. And so we are going to be able to share a little bit more about that as well. Next slide, please. Oh, and yes, the June will be the public review every year, and September will be when we release, and that will be highlighted again later. Next slide, please. So what I want to make sure to share as well, I mentioned that there's so many stakeholders at the table and we have so many involved, and a large component of our work is patient-centered, patient-focused, and patient-engaged. And so we've had our advocates reflect a bit on their process. We have Deb Collier here today, who's a patient advocate who's been involved with our health literacy work and back in the past also on our return of results work. So she'll be commenting, but I wanted to reflect also some comments that I've received and have permission to share from some of our work group members. So Bernard Coley is a care partner. His wife has Parkinson's disease, and he's been involved with this glossary project and shares about what makes this process work, being this robust consideration of the usage context. We always are thinking and talking about where will people see this? We respect the different perspectives that come to the table and prioritize the patient perspective. And we do have a diversity of experienced perspectives from across the ecosystem, across the age spectrum, and even geographically. And with CDISC, working with them from a patient perspective, Bernard shared that this really is wonderful because of the idea of validated definitions, trustworthy definitions that have gone through a robust process. It's vetted. And that there's really been a sense of bidirectional knowledge exchange as I'm facilitating these groups. And as we're learning from each other, we're teaching each other what we know about specific terms and then learning from each other to come up with definitions that really work. Next slide, please. And I'll also note that we have a wonderful video of Roberta Albany, one of our patient advocates, sharing her experience of being on the work group. I won't play it for you now, just in the interest of time, but the link is here and will be in the chat. And what she's shared in her experience was really just, and what is so important about this work and why we love the volunteers that are involved is like, she wants to be a knowledge sharer. She talks about how she wants to just go into her community and she shares what she learns. She doesn't hide it. She wants people to feel like they can talk to her. And being part of this glossary and sharing out about this glossary has empowered her to have even another tool to share. Use the glossary to learn and communicate and ask questions about research. And next slide, please. So without further ado, since we have a little bit of a nice overview, we're going to have Kaylee Toe step forward and talk through a bit of the process that, walk through the website and talk a little bit about the elements of the website that we've incorporated in. So I'll invite Kaylee to come on camera, and then we'll move on to the next slide, please.
Yeah, so hello everyone. Thank you, Sylvia. I'm just super excited to be here today and share this new glossary with you guys. And before we unveil this brand new glossary website, we first just wanted to highlight a few things about the glossary. And we'll go into more detail on these bullet points later on, but I just want to emphasize a few things on this list. First, like Sylvia mentioned, this glossary just has such a robust and transparent system for all the terminology and resources created. As Sylvia mentioned, we have multi-stakeholder work groups, there's public reviews, way to provide feedback. And even though we're launching today, the glossary will continue to grow. It started with the 53 pilot words, and with this launch, we are bringing it to 167 words. And there are, of course, more to come in the future. And most of the terms that you can find in this glossary can also be found in the CDISC controlled NCI thesaurus. Next slide, please. So this is the new homepage for the glossary. You can see at the top under the blurb, there are some buttons that lead to additional pages, and we'll talk about those in a bit. But first, I just wanted to focus on a few other aspects of the new homepage that we have. So first, we have this improved search function at the top. You can enter a word and the search will first prioritize the terms that have the word in it. So for example, if I search data, I would get results for data and then data monitoring committee, etc. And then terms that have the searched word in it and its more information section will then come up as results. Next, there is an alphabetical list of all the terms you can find in this glossary as you scroll down the page, or if you click on the alphabet under the search bar, it will show the term and the plain language one sentence definition. So this is kind of just a quick and easy way for someone to just look for the definition if that's what they want. But then you can also click on each term to see more info. So let's say I click on phase, next slide. And so this is the page for phase. You can see that the term will be the title of each page. There will be an auditory pronunciation, and then the definition will also, again, be at the top of the page. And then you can see throughout the term pages, we've hyperlinked other terms that we have defined in the glossary. We also provide a use in a sentence and then more info for people that may choose to read it if they want to. We've also included a new section in this glossary relaunch, the other information to think about. And this section is really written in the second person, and we wanted to address the glossary user who may be a participant or a future participant, and just provide specific questions they may want to think about or ask if they're enrolling or thinking about enrolling in a study. And then we also have related words, a list of other reputable resources about that term that people can, again, further explore if they want to. You can also see the CDISC logo at the top of the page next to the term. And if there is controlled terminology, we have a link in the other resources that goes to the NCI thesaurus, and the term page will have that CDISC logo. For the terms, we also have custom images, and they are downloadable and can be used under our Creative Commons license. And as part of an overall update, we've implemented a new accessibility widget across the MRCT Center website, and it's included in our glossary pages. We've also tried to increase ways for people to contact us and just more opportunities to provide feedback throughout the website. Next slide, please. So at the bottom of each term page, this is kind of like the first way you can contact us. It's a quick way to provide feedback as you're scrolling through a page, just an immediate way. If you have something you want to tell us about the page that you're on, you can tell us if it's helpful, if you thought it wasn't as helpful, and then offer suggestions on what you think we might be able to improve on or what you liked on the page. Next slide. The glossary also has a built-in form as a second option to get in touch. You can find this form on the home page. And this form is a bit more detailed, and this slide kind of summarizes what you can do with this form. So you can suggest new terms that you think we should consider defining in the future. You can comment on the content that's already existing for the terms or images that we have. And you can also ask us how you might be able to help with the glossary or become involved. And there's also space for any additional comments that you have or that you think just might be helpful for us to continue building this website. Next page. And then we also have some other additional features that you can find on the home page. And this includes common questions, background information that we think will just help provide a richer context to this glossary. And this includes information like, what is this glossary? How does it work? Who are the people involved? What is the process of choosing and defining the terms? How images are created and how you can share and reference the glossary. The glossary will also have other downloadable formats. Currently, it's going to be in Excel and PDF. People can access it if these formats are easier for them to use instead of going to this website. And as mentioned, each image can also be downloaded individually. And I will pass it back on to Sylvia to talk about our images.
So just wanted to highlight a little bit about the images because that was something we'd always included even in our pilot, but we had initially used iStock photos and different kinds of ones that were just available that we purchased, but that meant that people couldn't use them beyond our own license. And so much of humanizing the research experience and being able to help people learn from different perspectives and different modalities is to have maybe some meaningful images that support that learning. So this process to develop images has been this iterative process. We have an internal team working on it, graphic designers and work group reviewers all contributing. And we have a mix of different types of flowcharts, icon type graphics, and illustrations all integrated. We've also included various aspects related to representation, really listening to our work group around skin color and hues of skin tones, around gender representation, LGBTQIA+, and different roles and different role groups being highlighted and shared and included. And we've also made an effort to develop special, individually crafted and bespoke alt text for every image for screen readers, that for folks who may have visual impairments, so that each image has a really detailed alt text description associated with it for those. And this is one of those things that is sort of behind the scenes, so you don't necessarily see it on the website, but if you use a screen reader, you can hear it, and that's really wonderful. Next slide, please. So with that little walk through some of the highlights, it's not everything, but it's a lot of what you are going to be able to get into using. I wanted to move on to the new opportunities here and start giving our panelists a chance to give some remarks. So next slide, please. So we're going to start by hearing from our patient advocate representative, Deb Collier, who's founder and president of Patient Advocates and Research, PAIR. And as I mentioned, we've been working with her for many years, and we're really grateful that you could be here today to share your perspectives, Deb.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm glad to be here. And yes, I've been here since the beginning, not only the beginning of the glossary, but the beginning of the aggregate return of results. So I am an oldster in all of this. Next slide, please. I thought I would give you, rather than my personal opinion, because you've gotten that from Bernard and Roberta in the resources that are available, to give you an idea of why this is important to patients and people. And I think one thing to always remember is that, especially in the US, our disease crisis system, because it isn't truly a healthcare system yet, people who are being diagnosed and going through the medical process are still the same people they were 5 minutes before they were diagnosed. But now they've been relabeled a patient, and everyone treats them differently. That includes not only their medical team, but also their family, friends, everyone. Next slide. And so the thing to remember is when you're diagnosed with a serious illness or a life-threatening situation, it feels like you've just been catapulted onto a new planet without any type of roadmap, dictionary, or survival training. And so that's the mindset that some of us have gone into the glossary project with. Next slide. And this is just an illustration with Patient Advocates and Research, or PAIR, which is a communication network. We've put together some words matter, and this is just a simple explanation or example of some terms, not necessarily terms that are all in the MRCT glossary, but maybe someday. And what the scientific and medical definition in general is for these. Next slide. And then how patients and the public think about these words also. So it's just really important to understand how different the perspectives can be and why that's important. So the one thing that's always missing for patients is context. And that's one of the things that we've really tried hard to make sure is included in the plain language glossary that you're seeing for clinical research. I'm not going to go through any of these definitions. It's just to show you that if without the proper context, the meanings can be very different for different types of people and different people coming into this for different reasons. Next slide. And then this is just a little plug for those of us who are involved in clinical research to help understand what it is that we do when we're involved in the development, the approval and activation, the recruitment. Then there's the strange word. Next slide, please, and results. The word there is the word that patients feel and have to go through. You call it in the industry retention or adherence or compliance. But think about how different it is in the mindset when you change that to the word endurance, because it is an endurance test for the person going through whatever it is they're going through, whether it's standard of care or a clinical trial. And so next slide. This is just to kind of illustrate how we do get involved and how we make a difference in the clinical trials and the research that are established, and therefore hopefully help provide better answers for patients. In the concept and protocol development, we definitely add relevance and bring in what patient burdens are so that they can be designed in ways that actually make more sense from a participative approach. We help with designs and eligibility and endpoint procedures, those types of things. And if nothing else, we provide a sanity check for the process to see, is this really going to help? Is someone actually going to join your study or not? And if so, why or why not? And can we get rid of some of the barriers through the whole thing? And of course, diversity plans. We have an opportunity with every clinical trial and research study to address systemic racism, and that's very important, as well as disabilities. So the representation is there. And then, of course, respect and information as we start to talk about plain language, like the glossary that we're going to be talking about. Next slide. So with that, I will end it and let Sylvia introduce our next panelist.
Thank you so much, Deb. Thanks for sharing those perspectives. And Chris, welcome. We have a newbie on the board here. He is our wonderful Chris Decker. He's the new president and CEO of CDISC, and we're so thrilled that you're here today to share some of your perspectives. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thanks for including me today. We have a great partnership with MRCT, and I was really excited to participate in this for various reasons, which I'll share. As Sylvia mentioned, I've just joined CDISC as the new CEO and president at the beginning of this year. I've been involved in industry on the sponsor and technology side for the last 30 years. So my somewhat narrow view, to be honest, has been in the clinical trial space of collecting and transforming and submitting data to regulatory agencies. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about CDISC. Next slide, please. So as you look at the website, the MRCT website, you'll see references to CDISC in a couple of places, and you can click on those links and go to that and learn more. But today, I really want to tell you about some basic understanding of the organization and where we came from and what we do today to give you that baseline. Next slide. So what was interesting is that I was reviewing my slides this morning, preparing for this presentation, I realized that nowhere did I actually spell out what CDISC means or stood for. I thought this was quite ironic and quite humorous, given the overall theme of this webinar today, to make words simpler and communication more effective. So let me tell you, CDISC stands for the Clinical Data Interchange Standards Consortium. That's a mouthful. But at the end of the day, we were formed in 1997 out of a DIA working group and became a nonprofit organization in 2000. And over the last 25 years, we built a consensus-based standards organization that focuses on clinical trials and clinical research. And we have a network of over 500 members and over 1,000 industry experts who contribute their time and energy to helping us to develop these standards. The standards are freely available and widely adopted throughout clinical research. And several of our standards are actually required by regulatory agencies, and I can supply more information to that if you reach out to me. At the end of the day, what we want to be able to do is define a single language for how we communicate the information that's collected, transformed, and analyzed in studies, and eventually submitted to regulatory agencies. So if we go to the next slide, where did this initiative begin? So 25 years ago, industry and regulatory sat around a table at a DIA meeting, and we challenged everyone to try to understand, why did we collect data in different ways? Why did every sponsor company decide that they wanted to capture the information in a different way? This really led to a lot of inconsistency across the data that was being collected, both within a company as well as across companies. So it really limited what we could do with the data, and it created a lot of work for sponsors and regulatory agencies to aggregate the data and get real value out of that information and find and get knowledge out of it. Next slide. So this happened both in collection and in aggregation. So as we started to put the data together, we realized we had different names of columns and different values. You can just see on this page the variability, and this is the absolute simplest of examples that we could use. So we decided to tackle this problem and look to build a set of terminology and a set of concepts and a set of definitions that were consistent across sponsors and that regulatory could accept, and begin to really look at the data the same way and realize the benefits and return on investment in their systems and their processes. So as we go to the next slide and we fast forward 25 25 years to today, CDISC has developed a broad set of standards. So there's a lot of buttons on here and arrows, but I really want to focus on that we built a set of standards and models, and every little badge here you see is a different standard that we built over time, from the design of the clinical trial through the collection, the analysis, the submission. And as we speak to the plain language that we were talking about today, that information is actually stored within our CDISC library. And the CDISC library is the source of all the terminology and metadata across the life cycle of our standards. In a few minutes, Aaron will share the incredible work that has been done by NCI and EVS, or the NCI EVS group, in partnership with us to govern all that terminology. So they are the Fort Knox of our terminology, and we represent a copy of that terminology in our library so that we can link all of our information together. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to share just the large breadth of relationships that we have. We can't do this work alone, and we have to do it in collaboration with all these organizations, and they all serve a different purpose. And it helps us to move our vision forward. As you see, MRCT is one of our academic institution partnerships. And I chose to end on this slide because I believe the work that we've done with MRCT in terms of getting this simple language that patients can understand is really important in bridging a gap. And over the last 25 years, I feel like the group that I've worked with in CDISC, the group that has developed these standards, really, to be honest, has been somewhat narrowly focused on the defined language that our clinical trial operations teams understand. The statisticians, the data management, the CRAs, and regulatory reviewers. But we've really, in my opinion, forgotten one important stakeholder, and one that Deb mentioned, and that's why she went first. And that is the patient, the participants in our clinical trials. And I think it's important, it's critically important, we make it easier for them to understand the clinical research, because if they understand it better, we'll get better clinical trials, we'll get better participation. So in just a few conversations that I had with Deb leading up to this, my eyes were open to some of the patient needs, some of the understanding of what they need from a terminology perspective. So I'm excited about this library of information, and I hope it's helpful for you as a community as we go forward. So thank you, Sylvia, and I'll hand it back to you.
Well, thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate you sharing your perspectives on this and the work that we're doing together. So now I bring us to Erin Wilbrett, who is the Biomedical Clinical Information Specialist and CDISC Terminology Program Lead. She and I have been very closely working on this over the last year or so since we've really gotten together, and she is like my Yoda when it comes to all of this. So so I'm going to pass the baton on to you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. So hi all, my name is Dr. Erin Mulbrot, and I'm a contractor for the U.S. National Cancer Institute's Enterprise Vocabulary Services, and I will refer to that group as EVS. I am a trained terminologist. That is a job that one can hold. It's a very exciting thing to do. And I happen to be the CDISC Controlled Terminology Program Lead for or on behalf of EVS and CDISC. So I'm going to talk to you today about how the MRCT glossary fits into CDISC and more broadly the clinical research, that sort of clinical research ecosystem. So next slide, please. So CDISC, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I just want to point out that CDISC has developed a robust terminology development, publication, and maintenance process to serve the needs of its user community and support its standards development activities. And this process it's a well-worn process that's been in place for over 15 years now. Next slide. And when we began the collaboration with MRCT, we were delighted. And when I say we, I'm talking about CDISC now. We were delighted to find that the MRCT development process is very similar to the CDISC process in a couple of very critical ways. So firstly, in both cases, the concept semantics are built by consensus within teams of subject matter experts who have very diverse backgrounds and experiences. and who are also end users of those same semantics. All of our terminology development teams enforce best terminology practices to develop clear, consistent, and precise language. And finally, the concepts for development are identified based on our community's needs. The CDISC collaboration has enhanced, though, the MRCT Center's processes by the introduction of a public review step, which in fact fulfills a requirement of a standards development organization and ensures greater accessibility to draft standards, as well as increasing the quality of the final product. Next slide. Another advantage of working with CDISC is the MRCT clinical research glossary terminology is now also, and I want to be clear, this is in addition to, so what Kaylee showed you at the beginning, of course, the MRCT terminology lives on the MRCT webpage, but the MRCT glossary terminology is also now stored in the NCI thesaurus. And I'm going to refer to, sometimes I might refer to the NCI thesaurus as NCIT, just FYI. So the NCI thesaurus is a widely recognized ontological standard for biomedical coding and reference, and is used by a broad variety of public and private partners, both nationally and internationally. And these include the U.S. National Institutes of Health, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and of course, CDISC. And the coding of these MRCT terms and definitions in the NCI thesaurus conveys a number of advantages. And these include, first and foremost, the assignment of what we call an NCIC code, which ensures a unique, unambiguous identifier code for each concept within the MRCT subset, which will become especially helpful for the team as they go forward and grow this glossary. It also allows for the MRCT terminology to be made available in multiple file formats, as well as being accessible by APIs. And finally, the MRCT plain language definitions reside with a more technical CDISC definition. And this gives us two views of the same concept that can be used for a variety of audiences, and also happens to provide traceability through semantic interoperability across data's life cycle. And this goes from study setup and the protocol all the way through to analysis and data submission. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to show you what this looks like within the ecosystem of the NCI thesaurus. This is the front page of the NCI thesaurus browser, which is openly accessible and very easy to browse. You use that search box in the very beginning there, and I'm going to.
Erin, you're muted.
That's very odd. Okay, cool. Sorry, I'll start the slide again. So I'm going to show you what the this NCI thesaurus browser looks like and what it looks like on our public facing. This browser is public facing. So and it looks like within the ecosystem of the NCI thesaurus. So this is the front page of the NCI thesaurus browser, which is openly accessible and easy to browse. And click once again. Thank you. So in the NCI thesaurus, we present the terminology, and this before we actually show you what an example term looks like. I just want to point out that in the NCI thesaurus, we present our terminology in an ontological hierarchy. And therefore, for our source partners, we create these codeless concepts that we use to basically bundle a subset of terms together so that that subset of terms can be published and maintained, and used as and can be used and linked up with, say, a data model, etc. Next slide, please. And you can see here in the relationships tab of this code list concept, which we called CDISC MRCT Center Clinical Research Glossary, you can start to see in that relationships tab the list of all of those terms that are in the MRCT glossary currently. Next slide, please. So we're viewing one of the MRCT concepts in the NCI thesaurus. So this is the concept for trial phase or as it's known in the MRCT glossary, is just phase. It has an NCIC code of C48281, and you can see how the MRCT plain language definition down at the bottom there is nestled together with the more technical CDISC definitions. And next slide, please. And then finally, in the relationships tab of this concept, you can also see where within the CDISC data model this concept is actually used. So you may see that this term is being used in the protocol or as a trial summary parameter within the clinical CDISC SDTM trial summary data set. This concept in particular also happens to show up in the CDISC's Unified Study Definitions Model, or USDM, that is used to support digital data flow across a study's life cycle. So this is all be showing during today's webinar, I am super happy to follow up offline with anyone that would like to explore the NCI thesaurus or CDISC terminology in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So everyone can pop onto camera now, and we're just going to have a couple of, we're going to discuss a few things, a couple of questions, because I think, and this will, I think, address some of the questions that are coming from our audience as well, around the fact that there are so many glossaries out there. So Deb and Erin, I'm going to put this forth to both of you, actually. There's so many glossaries out there, and why should people use this one? What makes this one unique? You know, how can we deal with the fact that there are so many out there? Does this have a place? So I'm going to put that out there for you both to kind of comment on, and especially because I think people struggle with how to integrate, or why should they use this one instead of another one, or why shouldn't they make their own, and so on. Deb, did you want to take that first?
I guess I will. So it's been a really interesting process to be part of this glossary project, as one of the 27 who reviews this. And we have very interesting, funny, and lively debates, because there are many people from different perspectives who are talking about this term. And so we've really learned a lot from each other, I think, on how to pay attention to different perspectives. And so everybody comes at this from one direction, sometimes two, but really mostly one. And so there's been a lot of thought and discussion and ideas behind each of the definitions that have been put here. The other thing that I think is really important is that it's not just the definition. Right? We have a plain language definition, but I know some of us really urged early on MRCT to consider the context and how that could be displayed as well. And you've done a great job with the illustrations, with putting it in a sentence so people kind of understand how that word might be used, and then other types of words that are similar or related to it. So I don't see that very often in most dictionaries, glossaries, or even thesauruses. So I think that's important.
Thanks, Deb. I
And
appreciate
to add to Deborah's, I think two things that really stand out to me as I've been working with MRCT through this process. The two things that really belie uniqueness here is, firstly, the inclusion of that public review step. There are lots of great glossaries out there, but very few of them actually pulse their user communities with a public review step before the content is published. And this really does ensure that you know, the end user, almost in some ways, it almost makes them feel, even if they're not working on the glossary development, it does make them feel like they have ownership over the glossary, and it makes them feel like they are part of that process. And so that the inclusion of that public review step also just makes the terminology better at the end of the day. So that's one of the things. And then the other thing, which I did show, is the linkage of the glossary terms with concepts that are used by CDISC data standards, right, through those NCIC codes. That really does allow direct semantic linkages. And, you know, we hear sometimes, some of us hear this phrase semantic interoperability, but this is really truly, that's how you get semantic interoperability, is through this coding process. And so you get then semantic interoperability with regulated data submission standards that are used in clinical research. And that's when we can really start seeing that flow through of the data life cycle, that I think we're all working very hard towards, because it just makes the data better.
And that notion of interoperability is so key, because I think one of the questions that came up from one of our audience members, from Kelly, is around, you know, when you have, there's a question around, do I have to use their language, or do I fight for our language? And I think the goal or the dream behind a glossary like this is that this all becomes our language. It's not ours and theirs, and that we have this plain language version of the definition that is then interoperated, if that's the word, to the technical definition that, you know, hopefully becomes something that is more of a standard between all of our different user groups and communities. So that's really a lot of the vision and what is unique in this way, and hopefully on the upswing to being taken up by more people as this gets rolled out moving forward. And then thinking of standards, this kind of leads us to you, Chris, because so here we are, you're leading a standards development organization, and a lot of your standards are really pushed or is supported by regulatory mandates, right? So that where you're creating a solution for people to be able to fulfill their regulatory requirements. And yet this plain language thing is not really something that is mandated yet by any regulatory agency. So why would CDISC take it on?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sylvia. And I think as we look at the difference between the many years between the development of the first CDISC model, which was STTM, the collection model, and regulation was 17 years. So agencies saw, I should say, organizations saw the value of standards independent of whether it was regulated or not. And I can tell you, I remember one of my first jobs in pharma before CDISC, trying to pull together 10 studies within the organization in the same indication, in the same therapeutic area. And it took us almost a year to pull these 10 studies together because of the language differences within that study. So I think that the need for standards isn't about regulations. It's about being able to use this language and these standards in a way that helps people either with their process or better understanding or better compliance to trials. If you think about the value for sponsors, is that they can have some of this language, this simplified language within the patient documents. You know, anything that a patient sees or a participant sees in a trial, if they can have that information available to them, then it only increases a sponsor's quality of their trials, right? You think about better recruitment, better enrollment, decreasing withdrawals and loss to follow-ups, better collection of the data as it's coming in. That improves the process. It doesn't need to be regulated, mandated to be valuable to an organization.
Yeah, so you kind of are answering what the other question was going to be, like, why should industry start adopting this? And it really has the twofold or even threefold benefit of like the sort of interoperability. It's better for patients and participants to be able to understand, and it's better for industry professionals to be able to communicate in ways that are, you know, that are clear and that help others understand. So thank you so much for sharing that. So when we're looking at this overall, and, you know, we've got a really vast number. I think at our max number, we had 286 people on the call. We have 263 right now. The smattering of folks are from academic industry, all sorts of different FDA, different government organizations as well. And so what are some opportunities for members of our audience to start integrating this glossary today? I know one is to download the Excel or download the PDF and integrate it into your day-to-day life. There's downloads now. You can actually build it into existing glossaries you might have in your own organization already, and have this be one of the ones that is supported, providing supportive information and communication. But how about other folks? Do others have ideas of how people can start to integrate this in? Deb, do you want to take, or oh, Erin, go.
I'll just go because I did, I've been thinking a lot about this as we've started this journey so I think, the high level answer, of course, is any kind of resources or documents that are patient or participant facing is just going to be a great place for the inclusion of these definitions. This is things like, and I'm sure Deb and Chris would say the exact same thing, but these are things like any kind of within trial registries, multiple parts of the protocol are going to have those kinds of views by patients and their caregivers, like titles and synopses and plain language summaries. But also, you could potentially use this in your inclusion and exclusion criterion lists. You could use this in your clinical study reports, your, informed consent documents, anything where you're going to have patients and caregivers interacting with the clinical trial is really ripe for linking these plain language definitions within those contexts.
Lots of use in documents. Deb, yeah.
I think I would just add that, the way to think about plain language documents is, yes, we're making this available for patients, their caregivers, and the public in general, but it also helps everyone else in the system, right? Because especially with the way that the glossary is set up with additional resources, it's like the entry point. This is your basic understanding of this term, how it's used. Here's a little picture to kind of give you an idea. And then you can go into more depth if you want to for the different explanations and the interoperability, the thesaurus, all of those types of things. So that's kind of the whole beauty of plain language, no matter what kind we're talking about. And today we're talking about the glossary, but we're also talking about plain language summaries for clinical trials and, things like that. It's almost like, here's a summary of the information in really basic terms. Now, if you want more information, here's your roadmap to that. Remember the roadmap idea. And so, it works for other providers. It works for other scientists in different areas or fields that don't know anything about this or haven't been involved in clinical trials. So it's for everyone that might want to know what these terms are.
And also, and again, onboarding for new research staff too, clinical research coordinators, clinical research managers. It's actually another place, data managers even, to understand the clinical research ecosystem as well.
And
So
I'm sorry,
Sylvia,
You're thinking, Chris, what were you going to say?
yeah, so well, Erin and Deb stole all the good stuff. So, but I'll go over one specific use case, which CDISC is heavily involved in, which is the protocol. And so there's initiatives out there through ICH called M11. You can look that up. That's looking to standardize and digitize the protocol. And this provides to me a great opportunity to use some of this plain language as we think about the protocol and the different pieces of that. Include, like somebody said earlier, right? The inclusion exclusion criteria, the schedule of events, all these types of things that we capture in a protocol. We're looking to standardize that as part of the ICH M11 initiative. And this is a great opportunity, I think, to start to insert some of that plain language content into that effort so that we start to simplify protocols. That's just one example, one very specific use case that I could see significant value in this moving forward.
And it's so great because the protocol, we all used to think no participants see the protocol, but that's not so much true anymore. And we also are having a big movement towards protocol synopses, summaries to help participants understand in the big picture about this study that they're thinking about. So we have a few minutes left here. I want to make sure, let's go back to screen sharing, if you wouldn't mind, Kristen, and we're just going to Well, so thanks for those. So I just want to quickly, and then I'll try to get to some of these questions, just highlight some of the next steps in continuing efforts. So we've emphasized public review as part of this, and we are growing public review participation and really wanting to move this into more patient public spaces, partnering with patient advocacy organizations, disease-specific condition organizations, others that can really help us reach a wider audience of users in the community who would be able to give their perspective. So you'll stay tuned for more information about that. Our next public review is in June. You'll see there'll be a webinar about that too, and we'll really be focusing on the patient voice in that public review process. And this will happen now, moving forward every June thereafter. We are also continuing to create content. We are releasing the next version in September. We are already working on the next batch of terminology that's going to be released then. It'll also be coming out every September thereafter. And so please use and share. Please identify which people and groups in your network could use this glossary. Share the link with them. Please share your success stories. I saw there was a question about, will there be case studies? Are you going to collect user cases? Yes, please. Tell us, share how you're using it, how you're implementing it. And also, in the interest of learning and humility, let us know what's missing or where some pain points still are where we could potentially help address that as we move forward. And just please keep, share with us how we can keep growing. We really do want to keep on growing this resource. So next slide, please. So I just want to make sure I thank everyone who's been involved. I didn't put the whole list because the list would go on forever, but there is a link on our website to all the people who've been involved. We're so grateful to our work group, to the expert advisory committee, to our users, folks that have started using it, put it on their website already, and even when it was in its pilot form, and just championing this work. And also just a quick thanks to my internal team that I work with, my communications team, the graphic designers that worked, and all the extra helpers that helped get to this point today. And just want to shout out to MRCT Center leadership, Barbara and Sarah, for really prioritizing an initiative like this to bring clear communication to patients and participants through the industry adopting plain language. So this is wonderful. So I think that's my last slide. Yes, so we have how many minutes? 3 minutes for maybe some questions and answers. So I want to be able to see what we've got here.
Can I just add one thing,
yes, of
Sylvia, while
course.
you're looking? Okay,
Yeah.
and that is, I'm not sure it was mentioned. If it was, I apologize. But the link to the glossary is able to be shared, and you can also embed it in your websites. So I'm sure if you use the email that I think Kaylee or someone put up there earlier for MRCT, they can help you through the steps for that. But that was on purpose, right? We did that so that this could be highlighted in everybody's website. And thanks to MRCT for doing that.
Oh, it's really our pleasure. One question that's come up has been around translation. So I do want to highlight that because right now, Kaylee had highlighted that we do have a new accessibility module widget that's attached to our entire MRCT Center website and includes the glossary. At this time, it does translate the glossary into 50 different languages. It uses Google Translate, so we all understand some of the challenges or limitations with that. And so in the meantime, we understand that translation is a very nuanced process. So you can use this for now, get your German translation, Azerbaijani, whatever language you want. And then if you're available and interested to volunteer and help us translate, we are excited to work with others to help translate this into other languages in a more official translation format as well. So please, we realize that this is a process. It's a process to do this well, but we're taking the steps to make this accessible and available to as many people as possible. And let's see what else. I'm looking else to see here. My goodness. You're getting a shouts out, Chris, about the subject participant distinction. Deb, you mentioned that to us. And it's really wonderful that we have that. There's really there's a lot of love for it right now. And recommendations to include on clinicaltrials.gov, definitely something we're exploring. There's,
I would just like to say to all of the
Please.
IRB folks that are on the call,
Yes.
thank you very much for your interest and commitment to trying to make language better. And please remember the word subject is something in regulations, but we don't have to use it in our everyday language or even in protocols. Because people hear it as a verb, not a noun, and nobody wants to be subjected to anything. Trial participant is a much better term.
I love it. And with that, I will say thank you to everyone for joining us today to celebrate this launch. Go forth, use the glossary, let us know how it works for you. Let us know what words you want us to tackle next. And we look forward to continuing this journey together to bring plain language, clear communication to patients, participants, and the entire research ecosystem. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon, day, wherever you may be.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.